Hey guys and girls, today I'm going to be changing the front brake pads and rotors on a 2006 Chevy Cobalt LS. The only things you need are just basically common hand tools. You need a breaker bar, a torque wrench, a rubber mallet or hammer, a flathead screwdriver, a couple of wire brushes, a floor jack, jack stands, wheel chocks or a piece of wood to put behind your tires so the car doesn't roll, a 19mm socket to take the lug nuts off, and a brake piston compressor. This I got on Amazon for, it was under $8. And then it's a good idea, I guess, to use a pair of gloves if you have them. Keep your hands clean. And also, you just need some lubricants and cleaners. You need some thread locker, some copper anti-seize lubricant, silicone paste, and some brake cleaner. A basin or a bucket to catch the brake cleaner as you spray it. I also use these small pieces of sheet metal that I put underneath the jack stands under the car, just to prevent divots in the driveway. It does help, as well as underneath the floor jack, because otherwise you can put divots in the driveway and it's a pain in the neck. Alright, let's get started. Also, you're going to need the two rotors and the sets of brake pads for the front of the car. All this I got off of Amazon. I paid, I think it was just over $90. A couple of years ago, I had gone to a shop because I didn't have time to do it myself, and I was going through my old receipts, and I'll put it in the video, but 2 years ago I paid a shop, I think it was $400 to do the front rotors and brakes, the front rotors and brake pads, which I'm still kicking myself in the head over. Basically I spent $310 that I didn't have to, but sometimes you don't have a choice, but I try to do as much as I can myself. This way I'd rather keep the money in my pocket than giving it to a shop. Okay, let's begin. Now on this vehicle, the 2006 Cobalt, these are not the lug nuts that are on the outside of the wheel cover. These just turn off very easily. They won't pop all the way out. You just have to loosen them, and then this wheel cover will come right off. And then down here on the wheel are the lug nuts that you're going to use the 19mm socket on with the breaker bar, and we're gonna loosen these up and get these off. Okay, I have the breaker bar with the socket on the lug nut, and you're just gonna pull up and loosen the lug nut, and you're gonna repeat that for each lug nut on the wheel. Just as a side note, the breaker bar is a good tool to keep in the trunk of your car, just in case you have a breakdown or you get a flat tire and you have to get the tire off the vehicle. A lot of times, just with the lug wrench in the trunk that came with the car, it's not going to get the lug nut off the car without a lot of trouble, if you can get it off at all. So this breaker bar really does come in handy. Okay, now I got all the lug nuts off on both sides, passenger and driver side. So now I'm going to jack up the vehicle and put the jack stands underneath. Okay, the first thing you want to do is put the wheel chocks behind the rear tires, so when you jack up the car won't roll on you. Always think safety first. Then you want to come around to the front of the car, put the floor jack underneath, and you want to position the floor jack so it's centered on the metal frame. You want to make sure you're using the metal frame to jack the vehicle up, as opposed to putting it under, let's say, the radiator, which you'll damage and crack. You always want to jack it up on a piece of metal frame on the vehicle, whichever vehicle you're using. So we'll just start jacking this up. Now I'm going to jack up the vehicle and put the jack stands underneath. Okay, now we're going to jack the vehicle up. Okay, we got that 14mm bolt out. Now, you could try removing this, lifting it up by hand. I was able to do it. It wasn't stuck, but sometimes they stick, so you might have to use a flathead screwdriver just to get it in there and gently pry it up. And then you can lift it up this way, and that'll expose your brake pads. So now we'll go ahead and take these brake pads out. If this is the first time you're doing your brakes, it's always a good idea. Use your phone or a camera and just take some pictures as you're going along, just so when you go to put things back, you know where they went. So right now we have the caliper folded up, and we can just take out the brake pads. Oops. Yeah, these are pretty bad. On some vehicles, I have a 2004 Nissan Sentra that I did the other day. I didn't videotape it, but the bolt that's up here on that vehicle, the caliper will just slide right off of that bolt. But on this car, the 2006 Cobalt, you need to use your breaker bar if need be to loosen that nut up here, or I'm sorry, that bolt up there, and then just use a regular ratchet, 14mm socket, and take that bolt out. Now, just make sure you're holding on to the caliper itself securely when you finally get that bolt, that top bolt out, because you have your brake line attached to the caliper, and you don't want that caliper to fall, because you can damage your brake line, which would be a pain in the neck to have to, you know, repair that. So just get a good grip on this. You could use a bungee cord and wrap it and hang it up there. Okay, what I did was I took the caliper and used a bungee cord and just wrapped it around the caliper and wrapped it around the coil on the strut, and it's hanging there and there's no pressure on the brake line. So that's what you want, because you have to remove these two bolts to get the caliper bracket off. And I tried using a bucket on this and it's in the way, so you're going to need the breaker bar to get in here to break these nuts loose, or these bolts loose, and there wasn't enough room with the bucket. That's why I'm using a bungee cord. Okay, now I have my my breaker bar with a 15mm socket on that bottom bolt that's holding the caliper bracket on. So we're going to break that loose, and then we're going to do the same thing on the top bolt right there. Okay, use the breaker bar on the bottom bolt, and I used a breaker bar with a 15mm socket on the top bolt. Both bolts are both 15mm, and then you could just use a ratchet to unscrew these bolts all the way. Okay, I have the bottom bolt out, top bolt is loosened. I just wanted to show you where the brake pads went on the inside and on the outside of the rotor. When you order your new brake pads, make sure it comes with the hardware, the clips that go onto the caliper bracket, because you don't want to reuse these clips, because as you can see they're all rusty and dirty. So you want to replace that hardware, make sure it comes with your new brake pads. Okay, now with the 2 bolts out, you can just take the caliper bracket right off, and then the next step will be removing the rotor. The rotor on this will come right off, it's not stuck on. If your rotor happens to be stuck on, you can use a rubber mallet and just tap around the outside of the rotor just to loosen it up so you can get it off the car. Now that you have the rotor off the vehicle, you want to grab a wire brush, or if you don't have a wire brush, you can use sandpaper, and you just want to brush down or sandpaper down just to get this rust off as best you can. It doesn't have to be shiny, but you just want this to be smooth so the new rotor will be nice and flush up against that. Just want to go around the whole thing. Just to get that rust off. And as with anything else, when you're scraping or sanding something, you probably want to wear goggles or safety glasses, and even a mask, just so you're not breathing all this dust in. We have this all brushed down from our wire brush. It's pretty smooth. There's no rough edges. Now what you want to do is just take some brake cleaner and spray it down real good. It's a good idea to wear goggles or safety glasses, especially where I am today. It's very windy, so you don't want any of this blown into your eyes. Okay. Now that that's sprayed down, you're going to take your caliper bracket, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to use the wire brush and brush this down really well. And then we're going to spray it down with the brake cleaner as well. These are the brake clips that you want to take out and put in the new ones when we're ready to put the pads in. Just note how that you're taking them out. The way they go back in is the same. You don't want to reuse these. So we'll scrape this all down, brush it down, sandpaper it down if you have sandpaper, and then we're going to spray it down with our brake cleaner. Just as a side note, the caliper bracket is very dirty, so you definitely want to use gloves when you're brushing this down. Otherwise your hands will get real filthy. Just save you some cleanup time. Just use some care when you're brushing it down. You don't want to brush over these rubber boots, because you can splice them and tear them. So just use caution when you're brushing it down. Don't go over those rubber boots with a brush or sandpaper. Now the bracket is brushed down, so you just want to spray it down with some brake cleaner. Just get all that excess dirt and rust off of there. And you can turn it around and do the other side. Okay, we have the hub assembly all brushed down. Spray it with brake cleaner. We did the same to our caliper bracket. Now you want to take your rotor and you want to take your brake cleaner and just lightly spray it, and use a paper towel or a rag and just wipe it down real good, because when they package these up, there's a film on there to prevent it from rusting, and you can see that coming right off. So you don't want to have anything between your rotor and your brake pad except for the brake pad. So You get one side done, and then flip it over and spray it down on the other side, and wipe that down as well. Okay, now that you sprayed the rotor down, we can put the rotor on, and if you see, it doesn't really sit by itself. So what you can do is take a lug nut and kind of tighten that on. Okay, now we're going to take our caliper bracket and put that back up on the rotor, and we secure it with these two bolts that we took off previously, the 15mm bolts. You just want to use some of that thread locker on the bolt if it wants to come out. Keep it in place nice and secure. Okay, now we put the bracket back on and just kind of line up the holes, and then we're going to do the top bolt first, the top one up here, the 15mm. Okay, you can just tighten these bolts down by hand until you can't go anymore, and then you're going to use your torque wrench to tighten these down. On the 2006 Cobalt that we're working on here right now, they get tightened down to 85 pounds on the torque wrench. Okay, we have the torque wrench set for 85 pounds. And when you hear that click, that means you reach the 85 pounds. So that was the bottom nut, or I'm sorry, the bottom bolt. You want to tighten down the top bolt to 85 pounds as well until it clicks. Okay, now that the caliper bracket is on, we want to go and carefully take off our bungee cord off our caliper. Just make sure you support it with one hand so you don't damage the brake line. And once we get that off, we'll take it from there. Alright, now this piston we have to compress into the boot of the caliper to make it flush relatively, because the new brake pads are wider than the worn out ones that we took off, so it won't fit with this piston sticking out like this, because as your brake pads wear, the piston pushes out to give you that extra pressure on your brakes. So what we want to do is clean this little ridge of the piston off, because as you can see, there's a lot of dirt and grime up there and some rust. So we're just going to use some brake cleaner. Do not spray it directly on the piston, because you could damage the boot. All that material gets sucked in there. So you want to take a paper towel or a clean rag and just lightly spray the towel or rag, and then just kind of wipe down the outer edge of the piston. Now that's a lot cleaner than it was. So now we're going to take our handy dandy compressor tool for the piston and one of the old brake pads. You just need one. You're just going to put it up on here against the piston and put your compressor tool right in here, and then we're just going to turn clockwise. Okay, once you start feeling pressure as you're turning clockwise, if you feel resistance, it's getting harder to turn, then stop and then turn it counterclockwise to release it. And you can take the compressor tool out and the old brake pad. And now we're ready to put in our new brake pads and finish off the caliper. Okay, now we're going to take our new hardware, our clips, and we're going to put them in the same way that the old ones were. Basically, it just slides right on. This is the bottom one. If you can see, it has this little hump in it. And on the caliper bracket itself, there's a ridge that goes up, so just make sure that the clip is seated in that little hump. And the same thing on the inner side. There's a hump, and the clip goes right over that and into the groove. And then we're going to do the same thing on the top one. Okay, now you want to take your copper lubricant and just very lightly add some to where the brake pads are going to sit. Just make sure you don't get any on the rotor, and you want to do the inside as well. You don't have to use a lot, just a little bit. And also up on the top hardware. And also on the inside top. Right in that groove. And you can put a little bit on here where the brake pads will sit. And on the top as well. Okay, just to give you a comparison, obviously this is the new brake pad. You can see how much meat is on it. This is the old brake pad, and you can see how worn down it was, so it was long overdue to change them out. Now you want to take some of your copper lubricant and just put it on a little bit on the outside of the brake pads. Just want to make sure you don't get it on the brake pad itself that touches the rotor. You're just putting it on the plates. Now we're going to take our brake pads one at a time, and we're going to put them onto the hardware. Let me switch hands. That's the one side, and then we'll put our second one on. Okay, we got both on the one side, on the driver's side. They look good, nice and meaty. Now we're going to put on the caliper and secure that. So I put a little bit of Loctite on the two remaining bolts. Caliper back over the brake pads and the rotor. Now you're going to use a ratchet with the 14mm socket and tighten down the bottom bolt. Okay, now we're going to use our torque wrench, and we're going to torque those two bolts to 25 pounds. Okay, that clicked, and then we'll do the top one as well. And the top bolt. And then once we get those tightened down with the ratchet, we're going to torque it to 25 pounds. Okay, now we're going to use our torque wrench, and we're going to torque those two bolts to 25 pounds. Okay, that clicked, and then we'll do the top one as well. Okay, now we're back in the vehicle. We're going to turn the accessory back on, and we're going to turn the wheel so it's straight, and then this way we can get the wheel back on the driver's side. Okay, now we're going to put the tire back on. As you can see, I already did that. Put your lug nuts back on, finger tighten them, and I'm just going to use a ratchet just to straighten it out a little bit, and then I'm going to proceed to the other side, which I'm not going to videotape because it's just the reverse of this side. I just finished the brakes on the passenger side. So what I want to do now is take the jack stands out from under the vehicle. Before you can take the jack stands out from under your vehicle, you have to jack up with the floor jack. You have to jack up the car a little bit. This way you can lower the jack stands and pull them out. Okay, now with this jack stands safely out from under the vehicle, we're going to slowly lower the jack. Hopefully, okay, one-handed is not advisable. You just want to have the tires touching the ground so they don't spin when you're torquing the lug nuts. The lug nuts on the 2006 Chevy Cobalt are torqued to 100 pounds each nut. It's advisable you do a crisscross. Tighten one, then tighten the one opposite, and then proceed to the other ones and do the same. Last step is lower the jack so the vehicle is on the ground all the way. Pull your jack out, and what you want to do is come in the vehicle and pump the brake, nice and easy. That's 2, 3, 4. When you first start, it's probably going to feel mushy, and then it starts to get stronger. Okay, I'm going to show you a video. I'm going to make another video, that shows you how to bed the brakes. Bedding the brakes is just breaking the new brakes in, and so they wear evenly and they don't warp the rotor. So I'm going to do that shortly, and you can watch that as a follow-up to this video. Thank you for watching. Hopefully I helped someone out there. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up and feel free to subscribe. Thanks again, and have a great day.